All right, now we can officially get started. Welcome to our email threats and human risk webinar today. This is our Convene Chats webinar. So this is kind of our follow-up series to our in-person Convene events, of which Cofense was a sponsor this past spring. And so we are joined today by Lee Martin, Beth Ohrnberger, and Max Gannon, who are from Cofense team. And we're going to be talking about email security today, something I know we all are thinking about all the time, especially with phishing, business email compromise, and entry points for ransomware. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lee first. He's our senior director of product management, and then we'll get through the horn and introduce everybody. So Lee, if you want to go ahead and start introducing yourself, we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cliff, and thanks for having us. So as Cliff said, my name is Lee Martin. I'm the Senior Director of Product for all things security awareness at Cofense. And today I've got with me Max Gannon and Beth Ohrnberger. We're going to be talking a little bit about some different aspects of email security, different threats and human risk, but also I think our conversation is probably going to go and to give you some ideas of how to potentially improve the program that you're currently running and how to really look at security posture and human risk in those areas. And so to do that, I've got some really great guests here. So Max, if you would like to go first and give everybody a little bit of an idea of what your background is, and then Beth, if you'll go next, everybody will start to see it come together on how we've got different voices here.
Sure thing. So as Lee said, I'm Max Gannon. I'm the intelligence analysis manager here at Cofense. I started out some time ago at the pretty basic analyst level, and I've worked my way up to where I'm now focusing on strategic reporting and more overall content of the phishing threat landscape. So I've got insight into a couple different levels of it, and hopefully I'll be able to add a little bit of context here to what Lee's talking about.
And Beth?
Sure. Hi, I'm Beth Ohrnberger, and I'm a senior content developer here at Cofense. And I've been creating educational content here for nearly 10 years, and that includes e-learning videos, interactive experiences, infographics. And one of my goals is to make security awareness training, which is a topic that doesn't always necessarily excite people, and making it fun, relatable, and engaging so they remember the information and can apply it in their everyday lives to better protect their organization and themselves.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. So one of the things that I wanted to kick off the conversation about was getting an understanding of like where sort of let's say one malicious email that comes into an organization, how in our current infrastructure it might flow to Max and then to Beth and then to a learner so that everybody can kind of understand the mechanics of some of the things we'd like to discuss today. So what people might not realize is that from a Cofense perspective, almost all of the simulated emails that we put in our PhishMe simulator product are actually real malicious emails that have bypassed perimeter security and made it into a real person's inbox. And Max, from a phishing defense center standpoint, can you give folks a little bit of an insight on how that email might get to you or one of your team?
Right. So what happens is, as Lee said, the email goes through, it gets through perimeter defenses, it ends up in somebody's inbox, and then they report it. So typically this is because they've had training from us, so they're able to spot all the suspicious indicators and be like, okay, something's not right here. And then they send it over to the PDC and to the intelligence team, and then we analyze it and we go in depth and we say, okay, here's each of the different stages of the infection, here's what's unique about it. We find particularly the ones that look like they'd be most effective, and then we actually pass them off to Beth, and she's able to do some pretty interesting stuff with them.
So Beth, what do you do next once that's handed off to you?
Yeah, so once it's handed off to us, we are able to add them to our PhishMe simulation product so customers can use them. And we also are able to tag them with secure email gateways and industries, so that way customers can filter the emails, so they're able to filter by the secure email gateways they use and their industry, so they're able to get threats that are more relevant to them. And we use threat intelligence very closely in all of the content we make, working closely with Max's team to make sure we incorporate real threats, real phishing email examples in our educational content, because that's really the best way that you can prepare learners for what's out there and what to expect and best practices around those real threats.
So
So
Beth brings up something really interesting. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Max, but like when we talk about using real threats, right? The conversations we have on the content team are often around, how important threat fidelity is to, making sure the learning objective in any piece of content is aligned with that or in a simulation. Um, is that really enough though? Like using a real threat, from 3 years ago, how important is that compared to having a really sturdy and resilient security posture? Max, what do you think?
so
Yeah.
honestly, 3 years ago is I'm not going to say useless because it does, improve people's resiliency and enables them to better spot things. But emails from 3 years ago, even from like a year and a half ago, things have completely changed, especially with AI rolling out. We don't see the simple mistakes that we used to see. Almost all the stuff we see is advanced. The majority of it is very convincing. It's got the right logos. It's got spoofed email address from. It's got all the little things that make it look legitimate. So training, especially on the older stuff, is just going to be basic, and it's going to be stuff that SEGs stop. So if your SEG stops it, then your employee's never going to see it. So it doesn't really matter if they're trained on it because they're never going to interact with it. It's got to be the stuff that actually makes it through perimeter defenses that the employee actually sees, because otherwise, like, what's the point?
So now we're touching on something that's interesting because it lends itself to how somebody might build a program. So if you're building out a program that is looking at and in Convene, I've been ringside, Cliff, for some of these conversations where we talk about the annual yearly security awareness compliance module, like an e-learning module, and that's sort of the starting point, and the retention of those learning objectives is probably not really great. If we're saying here that if you extend that into simulation or training, whether, that might be something that you full on simulate folks on, or it could be something that, let's say it's a sensitive enough topic that it would be disrupting to your workforce if you actually simulated it. So you send out a newsletter about it, that kind of thing. But it's the timeliness of this that's really important. So like if I was to give advice to somebody who's running a security awareness program, their goal is better security posture, not just compliance. They want to see an effect. You wouldn't want to plan that out a year in advance, where you have every single simulation decided in January. By the time you get to September, if I'm hearing you right, you're probably off target. You've drifted away from what the threat landscape has moved to. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. There's significant changes that happen in very short periods of time. And there's some trends where we can say, Q3, Q4, we see a lot of termination theme stuff. There's like some really broad stuff we can do for that. But the more specifics of what the email actually looks like, that's going to change drastically.
So going beyond that, so Beth, you've given us examples of how we could publish what we would call a SegMiss, or a simulation template that's bypassed a specific security email gateway. You can go into PhishMe and choose what is yours at your company. But to actually take it to another level, how important do we think it is to look at not just threats that have bypassed a SEG anywhere in the world, but potentially SEGs that have, threats that have targeted your own domain or your own company?
Yeah, that's very important. We recommend working closely, that security awareness training operators work closely with their SOC so they're able to simulate real threats that are targeting their organization. And you could send those out as email simulations, also awareness newsletters. A great best practice to help build a strong security awareness culture is to send out regular newsletters with updates about your program, the top reporters, and also recognize people who have reported real threats as well as simulation emails as well.
reporting is key. I mean, right at the beginning of our conversation, all of this data starts with a human being actually identifying, potentially a 0-day threat that they are going to hit with the reporter button. I guess my question would be, if I'm out here in the audience today listening and I'm running a security awareness program, I might not have ever spoken to somebody in the security operations center or somebody who's running email security for my company. Max, I mean, what would be your advice to tell that person in terms of how to engage with a SOC to even start that process, as opposed to, making an email simulation on your own or customizing one that already exists?
So, I mean, of course, I'd recommend talking to the manager of the SOC, but you can also talk to individual people in the SOC. So what we've got, we actually have a Slack channel set up. And whenever a SOC analyst sees something interesting, they post about it. And usually the interesting things are the ones that are advanced. So just by having this channel, we're constantly getting good samples that we can use. And engaging with the people in the SOC typically is not going to be that hard because they're proud of what they find. They're like, hey, look at this cool thing that I found. Like, I did an analysis, check this out. They're not going to be like trying to hide what they're doing from you. They're going to be like, hey, check it out. This is cool. In fact, you probably have to worry about them giving you too much more than anything else. So once you get past that first step of engagement, they're a really great resource and they can work really closely with you if you give them the opportunity.
So the interesting thing is that logic would suggest that there'd be some follow-on positives for the SOC if you develop this sort of cyclical relationship between ongoing training and ongoing, malicious email defense. How big of an impact can it make to the SOC if you're actually training folks on things that are hitting your domain?
So it can make their lives a lot easier, which in turn makes your life a lot easier. So when you get feedback from the SOC, you can get stuff where it's like, all right, so this kind of thing is spam. Don't report it to us. Just like that, you can be saving a ton of hours of productivity from the SOC just by saying, these emails are spam, please don't report them to us. Just throw them in your spam filter, throw them in the trash, whatever. So there's all these different benefits that can come from it. Like, it's just really convenient for them, and all the information they can give you, especially what goes in a newsletter, is really helpful, because there's a lot of stuff like termination themed emails, where you're threatening to get fired. You can't really put that in a SIM or people are going to freak out. Like, it would go very, very badly. But if your SOC says, hey, we've been getting a lot of termination stuff, it's very convincing, then you can work with them and put it in a newsletter so people will see it and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, now I know what to look for.
Gotcha. So you mentioned something earlier when we were first starting around AI, and I know, Beth and I have been in the trenches, with all of the different AI mediated threats. When I started in this business, it wasn't that difficult to spot fish from threat actors, especially, in North America. Maybe they're from a country where English is not their first language, and it was kind of obvious in the construction of the language of the email. But what we're seeing now is very limited or almost no indicators of a fish. I think you mentioned, we were talking a while back about an email that the suspicious thing about it was too perfect for one to come from our government or something like that. And it kind of blew me away. It was like, well, what do we do from a learning objective standpoint when you're dealing with something that's too good?
The government organizations actually suffer the most because a lot of their emails are relatively simplistic. They don't really stay up to date with all the current marketing trends of what an email looks like. So pretty simple emails. And then you get something from a threat actor and they go overboard. It's got the logos, it's got the links, it's got the little, this is how you know it's a government website. Like, they put everything in it. So it looks so legitimate. You're like, well, obviously this is it. It'll even have like a .gov in the from address. So there's a lot of different things they do to make these seem legitimate. And sometimes government websites will use like mailing lists from weird email addresses that you see it and you're like, that's suspicious. Whereas the threat actors are full on spoofing actual .govs that look legitimate. Like, they're just very convincing. Sometimes the only thing that makes you say this is suspicious is, for example, if you get an email from, the IRS. Probably not legitimate. They don't really do that.
Right. So what it's sounding like is that there's a cultural component here that has to be, it's beyond mastering specific learning objectives. You know, the sounds like the days are gone when I'm going to teach you a specific indicator of a fish, and that's going to keep you safe. You know, check these two things and you'll be fine. It's really more about a degree of sensitivity and group awareness around what's coming at you all the time. When you, is there an aspect of a program that is incorporating almost as equal partners, the SOC and the SAT group, that has a follow-on benefit from a cultural standpoint, meaning, you know, groups that otherwise might not even be talking to each other are collaborating on the program itself? Your security posture could be raised because you've actually got a higher degree of sensitivity for threats that you've never seen coming or that don't have an easy indicator. When we describe like that one person that reports an email that potentially hit 30, 40 other people, the first person that can get that reported, the SOC can analyze it, confirm it, and quarantine it, yank it out of the other folks' mailbox. It seems to me that like the knowledgeable and aware and suspicious employee is often really upstream and super valuable to really expensive technical solutions to quarantine emails. Is that a fair statement to make?
Oh yeah, especially, so not to give a product pitch, but we have something called Vision where if you get a URL and it shows up in other people's emails, they just get pulled from the inboxes. So even if you've got someone who's not great at reporting, like is really bad at reporting, if they get this in their inbox and then at the same time somebody who's good at reporting spots it and reports it, then it gets pulled out of everyone's inbox. So even if not every single person is great at reporting, as long as you have specific people who are really good at it, they're protecting everyone. And they're saving a lot of time. Like the SOC doesn't have to do remediation on infected computers. It's just these individuals who are well trained are just really saving so much.
Gotcha.
And they're also applying it to outside of phishing, because when you're well trained enough, you just kind of have honestly general suspicion for anything technology. So when they get a text message saying that their license plate has, you know, a fee they have to pay on it, they're not going to go, well, okay, this seems legitimate. They're going to go, hold on, I've seen some suspicious stuff recently, and they'll take those couple seconds and think about it.
Yeah, and one of our goals on the training side is to really teach learners to pause. And we're not just trying to teach them about red flags, we're trying to train them to slow down and assess the email, text message, phone call before taking action. And like you were saying about the rise of generative AI, it's really changed the landscape for the training aspect and how we're advising people. So we're also recommending to look closely at the sender email address because a lot of times they can change a letter or two. So looking closely there, and appealing to urgency or fear are also two big ones. And the more urgent an email is, the more you really should slow down, assess it, pause before acting.
So Beth, those are such important learning objectives. How are you, you know, as you're a writer and a media creator, and you're out there trying to create a learning experience apart from just simulations. I mean, some of these are direct trainings, right? Some of them are infographics or newsletters or even sort of an e-learning experience. How do you make the memories durable of this good information? Because if you just grab somebody off the street and said, let me talk to you about how to analyze an email, it's a pretty dry topic, right? How do you make a durable memory that's sort of complementary to that kind of culture that we're talking about wanting to build?
Yeah, so since you only really have 8 seconds to grab someone's attention, we recommend using relevant themes, holidays that they'll recognize, movies, TV shows. So when they see it, they're more likely to stay on the page and engage with the training as well. And we just did a really cool Formula One themed campaign for Cybersecurity Awareness Month that was really popular because people saw it and recognized and related to it. So they were more likely to want to engage with the content and participate and get on the leaderboard for their company and get recognition.
Well, so that's another interesting aspect. I've had lots of great conversations with, you know, from medium sized to the very biggest, Fortune 100 companies who are running security awareness programs. And while there's a lot of diversity, there's the good programs have a lot of things in common, are the ones that are getting the best results. And one of those is it goes beyond just sending out a lot of simulations or sending out big e-learning experiences. It's sort of like wherever you go in the company, this program is visible. This program is aware, you're seeing artifacts of it maybe in the break room, or it's being mentioned in an all-employee meeting, or during Security Awareness Month. There's one company I'm thinking of specifically that actually has events that they're doing every week in October to make sure that everybody remembers that if you work here, this is part of being an employee. The one thing, and I will talk about something from a design standpoint that that might be interesting to some of the folks on this webinar, because I know we've got people that are running their own programs. Some of them are creating their own content, is trying to find emotional triggers that consolidate memory. There's a very technical term, post-arousal consolidation, in terms of how memories are made when stress is induced. So one of the reasons that phishing simulations, going all the way back to when PhishMe sent its very first simulation, that it worked is that uh-oh moment. You've clicked on, let's say, a link click simulation, and you find yourself on the education page and like, oh no. But a lot of times that's all you remember. If you go to somebody who was susceptible a year ago to a single simulation out of maybe 12, 10, 8 they got that year, it's unlikely that they could tell you exactly what indicator of a phish they missed, or anything that specific. Do we think that there's anything that somebody who's running a program, or maybe customizing or creating some of their own content, that they should take into account to try and make it more than just that uh-oh moment that helps consolidate some of that memory?
Yeah, I would say, like we were talking about earlier, incorporating real threat intelligence. So if they're receiving threats that are or email simulations that are really targeting their organization, they might recognize them from a newsletter they received as well. So
Gotcha.
helping, to build that as well.
Max, there was one thing that I was curious about. We talk about things at like a company level, at a domain level. How important is it, if you were the advisor for somebody running an awareness program, how important is it to do group-based training? Or is it, to say like the threats that are faced by facilities operations versus finance? Like, how important is it to differentiate what you're training them on at a simulation level or otherwise?
Yeah, so it is super important. It's also really important to do it based on your own industry. Like, for example, if you're talking about the construction industry, we get a ton of bid request themed phishing emails for the construction industry. You go to the finance industry, they're not getting bid request emails all over the place for construction projects. So if you're theming your emails on bid requests and you're a financial company, you're really missing out. So you need to look at, who you're targeting internally and where your company lies. So another thing is BEC is particularly targeted at administrative assistants. That's, a really big target. So if you're using BEC themed phishing templates and you're sending them to, somebody who works in the warehouse, not really that helpful. But if you're sending BEC themed things to admin assistants, it's actually going to help improve their resiliency.
So are we to think that because tooling is making things less expensive and easier to do well, from an AI perspective, that we're going to see the threat landscape shift more towards not just business email compromise, but almost like the gateway into that being more of a spearfish than a spray and pray kind of mentality of I'm going to email 10,000 people with something kind of vague and hope statistics gets me there?
Yeah, so AI has unfortunately, AI and ML have really improved threat actors' skills in that area. It is very easy to get your hands on, sometimes even for free, tools that basically enumerate all of the employees of a company on LinkedIn or whatever platform, get information about them, and then you can use their titles from LinkedIn or other information from LinkedIn to customize the emails that you send to them. So you can essentially automate highly targeted emails where it's got the person's name, sometimes it has their department, it's got all this information in it. It appears to come from whoever they're reporting to, whoever their manager is. You can enumerate all of this and feed it directly into these advanced phishing emails with very little effort these days. There is a little bit of cost if you're getting the particularly advanced ones, but you can even do a decent job with the free ones. And the only thing really preventing threat actors from doing it, really at scale is time. It takes them a bit of time to set up. But if somebody is really after a breach at your company, they're going to put in the time, and you're going to end up with customized emails hitting, everybody who's in a position that matters.
So that's the interesting thing around risk, right? Is that it's not just tied to how well you do spotting potentially malicious emails or suspicious emails. There's a linkage there to your access and your visibility, right? So if you do have a big presence online and you are maybe speaking for the company, this would put you at a higher level of risk. If you have the ability to, submit, and wire money, without additional oversight, it looks like somebody, the crosshairs would be like looking for you quite a bit. Do we think, that most companies that have thousands and thousands of employees, it'd be quite difficult to build individualistic campaigns that are spear phishing, only the most risky folks. But so what you usually see is these larger campaigns, 100,000 recipients getting the same email. How much of a benefit would we need to show in terms of like a reduction, not just in breaches, but maybe an increase in quarantines in a SOC to show that one type of program works better than another? I think that there was something we were talking about it at some point in the past, Max, about the economics of dealing with a credential phish versus the economics of dealing with malware from the SOC's perspective, and how like specific threats in a specific group, if it's one, it might actually cost quite a bit more in terms of time and money to deal with.
Yeah, so if you've got a decent SOC and IT team, if somebody gets their password compromised from a phish, it's a problem. But if they remediate it quickly, and they should if they're doing their jobs, then it's only a problem for a short period of time. It's, obviously bad, but it can be fixed relatively quickly if you take the right steps. However, if somebody sends out a more advanced email that delivers malware and somebody installs it, then once that malware is in place, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of threats, including ransomware. And the most recent malware that we've seen is actually technically legitimate remote access tools. So sometimes it's even the same tools that your IT team uses. So
How
they
can it be
show up
legitimate
and
if it's a threat? Explain to everybody how that could work, because that seems like two separate things, I think, to a lot of people.
So if IT needs to access your computer for whatever reason, they need to install an update, they need to do whatever, then there's all kinds of software solutions for that. A particularly popular one for a while was ConnectWise. So it's signed, Windows thinks it's legitimate, everything about it appears legitimate, network traffic appears legitimate. And in some cases, your actual IT team uses ConnectWise. So nobody's going to detect it as being bad. But once it's in place, if the threat actors are using it correctly, they can take complete control just like IT can, and they can install whatever they want. They can spread to other machines in your network. They can do all these things. And most defenses are still saying, well, this is a legitimate binary. So as we see more and more of those happen, it's been a real problem recently. It becomes even more potentially impactful when one of those single emails can essentially infect your entire network.
Gotcha. I did notice, forgive me for pumping the brakes just a minute, I did notice that we have a really interesting question that popped up in the Q&A from Melissa. It says, do you give detection difficulty levels to your phishing simulations, and how do you determine which levels you send based on simulation results? So actually, this is something that we're building right now for our next major SAT release, which is in the process of being built. It's a combination of things. So there's an aspect of automation here where you're going to be able to automatically remediate your susceptible learners. So we're building that functionality, but in part of this is we're adding the NIST fish scales framework to our simulations. So the idea here is that's a formula that's based on the context of the email itself. Is it in context? It's sort of like what Max was talking about in terms of I'm in finance and I'm getting this bid request that should go to a contractor. It's not good context for me, so that lowers the difficulty level. And then what kind of errors in the email, and that forms together to give it a difficulty ranking. So, awesome. Yeah, so we're putting this in place. This is most likely going to be available in early Q1. So we're also always looking for people interested in beta, our beta program. So if you want an early look at it, we're going to have a beta period for this as well. So this is all under our FishMe license. So great question. Thanks for that. So it comes and thank you for that question, because it leads to another interesting place, which is difficulty in training, because I've always struggled with this from a learning perspective. Is difficulty always seems to me to be a little bit subjective. NIST does a great job with fish scales of giving you sort of an objective difficulty criteria, but the difficulty of an email that might rank high on a scale, if it's something that you see often, can become quite easy. It seems to me that the context of how habitually you're exposed to a threat makes a big difference too, in how easy it is for you to deal with it. Is that a logical fallacy perhaps, or is that something that everybody's dealing with? And that's for Beth or Max. Do either of you have an opinion on that?
I mean, I think in terms of, one of those Amazon package delivery fishes that people see all the time, they see them pretty frequently, and they also see actual Amazon emails pretty frequently. So it's going to be more likely to just kind of blend in and look like a legitimate one because they're just so used to seeing the legitimate ones. But if somebody, gets something like I don't know, DHL package delivery, that's going to be a little bit more out of context. Going to be like, well, what is DHL doing delivering something to me? I don't use DHL. I don't know anybody who uses DHL. So the context is definitely important.
Yeah, and a good best practice around that from a training perspective is to teach people to always go to the official site. Although it's maybe very tempting if you get a text or an email about your Amazon package you were expecting, saying there's an issue with it, instead of rushing into action and interacting with that text message or email, just go to the Amazon app or website directly.
Awesome.
And
go ahead.
I do want to break in. That is something we really especially recommend in Q3 and Q4, because we see a lot of HR themed stuff, like benefit statements, wages adjustments, termination, all these things coming from HR. And it's there's definitely ways of just sending an email reminder with no link and having employees go to your actual internal portal for all HR related things. That is a lot safer, and I highly recommend it because some of these HR phishing things are quite convincing.
Yeah, and that's also why we recommend to have ongoing communication with employees so they know the official policies and procedures. So making it clear, here's where to go, here's who to contact if you have any questions, and here's how to report if you receive anything suspicious or if you interacted with something suspicious. So trying to have more positive reinforcement than a punitive culture is something we recommend so people aren't scared or worried to report if something does happen.
Beth, I feel like you touched on a really interesting point that probably a lot of folks don't get, is that when they think about a security awareness program or a phishing resiliency program or even a human risk management program, they're thinking about the people administering the tools, right? But what you just described there is like all of a sudden HR becomes part of human risk reduction, right? Through how they communicate to employees. Payroll plays a role. It's not just the people choosing what training to send out to people. And it's something that you really need sponsorship and backing from the very top. This is something that is corporate wide, not just another training initiative like your annual compliance, behavioral compliance training you're going to take, or in a regulated industry. Some of those regulated industries you have to take compliance, right? I feel like this makes a pretty meaningful distinction between treating security awareness training from a compliance perspective versus how you're going to get the best results that actually end in a change in your security posture.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that, Lee, is it's really important to train new hires on what emails will look like that come from HR, from IT, from legal, so they know what to expect. One theme that we recommend training new hires on is voicemail phishing. What will it look like if you receive a voicemail? Because a lot of times people have no idea, and that's a popular one.
So that as we come toward the end, there's a couple of things I did want us to address, and that's a great segue, which is non-email mediated threats. So we've seen really sophisticated scams from a deep fake perspective, from a vishing perspective, where people are vishing or smishing, where it's not being mediated through email itself. How big of an impact has generative AI made on the sophistication of these types of attacks as well, that maybe they even start in an email, but they end up somewhere else. They end up on a Zoom call or something.
So I would say from my experience, the biggest place with that is actually QR codes, because threat actors are able to slip QR codes in, and most perimeter defenses don't scan QR codes, so they don't recognize that it's malicious. It looks to them like it's just an email with an image in it, so they just allow it through because it doesn't have any links. So people then use their phones to scan the QR code, and as soon as you're using a phone and not a company computer, you're losing almost all of your protections. So it's a lot easier to compromise once you're using your phone. And we've seen these QR code based, especially attached PDFs with QR codes. We've seen them at such a large scale and all customized with the employee name, the company name, even sometimes the company letterhead on the PDF that's attached. We've seen this at such a large scale that it's just not reasonable to believe that a human is doing it. So there's definitely some AI involved in just doing these large scale customized campaigns that take people outside of company defenses.
So this represents a whole level, a constellation of behavior that's a lot wider than just email hygiene, and a degree of suspicion that you need to bring to all kinds of interactions there. I get a lot of questions around deepfake and about threat actors using AI to deepfake executives within their company. Even some folks asking, like, should I be simulating, a deepfake version of my CEO, putting a message out there? And I've engaged in a couple of these, saying there's some pretty big risks in terms of creating a deepfake of your CEO and then putting them out there in the world, for threat actors to use. What would we think about that from that perspective? Like, is that a great idea? Is that a risky idea? Does anybody have an opinion?
So, not to speak badly of people, but I don't think it's worth the effort, because the kind of people who are going to fall for a not fully advanced deepfake are going to fall for an email that appears to come from the CEO. So honestly, like, training on either one is going to work. Like, you can put a truly ridiculous amount of time and money into generating a really good deepfake. Or you can just train people to be suspicious so that when they see the things like, hold on, that one shot of the CEO showed them with 6 fingers, that's not quite right. Stuff like that, then they'll notice it.
Right. Well, as we come up on time, I do see one more question in the chat from Misan. Says, I've heard some say phishing simulations are not effective in behavioral change and should be retired. What would be the most effective method in promoting a security-aware culture? Even quote unquote training has become white noise. So Misan, I really appreciate this question. This is something that I've heard mentioned as well. However, from a behavioral change standpoint, I would counter somebody that had that opinion with even within individual systems, you can see behavioral change manifest in a reduction of click rate. Now, click rate for a long time was a metric that everybody chased. We've been saying for a while that that's just one part that you want to focus on. That shouldn't be the grand focus of your entire email security awareness program. But I would answer this a little bit more broadly, that simulations and training are not your program. What we've been trying to discuss here today is that your program, a successful program that changes security posture for the better, that helps you reduce risk, is actually broader, and it's braided and insinuated into the sort of cultural DNA of the company itself. If I go to work for company X and to be an employee of company X, it means I'm inculcated into a security posture culture. That's the program itself. So phishing simulations and training, either one of them completely alone without any supporting context, I think there's a lot of critique that you could lob at them. But if you put them in the context of a more rich program, the program suffers if they're not there. They're key components that need to remain. So I hope that gives somewhat of an answer to the question. And Max or Beth, if y'all have anything y'all want to add to that.
Yeah, so I think on an individual level, I can say there are some people who do not learn from phishing simulations or are very, very slow learners. So there's definitely some people who it doesn't really seem to work that right on. But the thing is, if you're training your entire set of employees, there's going to be people who it does work well on and who are well trained. And then when you have those people report emails, those emails get pulled out of the inboxes of the people who are very slow learners. So the net effect is still very positive because those people who are slow learners don't get the opportunity to click those links and put in their credentials because the people who are well trained are reporting them and removing them from inboxes.
Outstanding. That's great. One more question from Nancy. When you do attack sim training, what is a result percentage that would indicate a good grasp on what a phishing attempt is? So it really, like most good things, it depends. You need to sort of see where your starting point is. Because if you have 100,000 employees and you've gotten down to a 4% click rate, most folks would say that's a great rate. But you've still got 4,000 employees out of every simulation interacting with a potentially malicious email. I've seen really mature programs get below 2, but this is something that you're sort of chasing diminishing returns, and it's really a challenge sometimes. So great question. Chase it below 2 if you can, but understand you're still, humans are fallible and we're still going to make mistakes, and you're not going to simulate human fallibility away. One more question from Tom. The studies that have been cited fish simulations on only a quarterly basis, and they checked if an online class, sorry, I'm having trouble reading it, and they checked if an online class reduced click rate. Tom, I'm sorry, I'm not positive. Okay, so the study showed that training didn't reduce click rate. Okay, right. So once again, training alone, I would say if you're running a compliance training and your whole purpose to reduce click rate was one big compliance training per year, I would agree. I don't think that would be effective. What you need is a fully fledged, constellation of activities that you're doing as part of your program.
And quarterly is terrible.
Yeah, right. And I'm not a proponent of compliance-based trainings. If the focus of your training is compliance, I think you're missing out on opportunities to really improve your security posture. Have security outcomes be the focus. Okay, one more good comment from Misan here, but I don't think there's a question in there. But thanks I found more success by giving examples of how employees can train their parents and children on how to stay safe online. That is fantastic. Absolutely true. I think relevancy has become a very important key part of our messaging. That is a great comment and absolutely spot on, Mason. So Cliff, I think we've burned through our time. I may hand the mic back to you for everything that's necessary at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has all been super helpful. I've heard a lot about some neat tactics, for building a security aware culture, from reporting to psychological to looking beyond just the indicators that you can see in the email and thinking about what is the overall context and the framing of the individual. We talked about how AI is making these more targeted and the ability of attackers to scale really, uh, you know, basically spear phishing everyone instead of just sending generic emails out. So there's a lot of new things to consider. And one thing I wanted to comment on that you guys brought up was the reporting piece and having like a Slack channel. And I was giving a talk at Secure World a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned, um, I was talking about phishing training exercises and things. And one of the audience members stood up and said that, they had a Slack channel where people could report or could talk about things that they were seeing, like kind of like a an all staff or all department channel where people could say, "Hey, this looks kind of weird. What do you guys think?" Um, and they were revealing the phishing simulations to the rest of the company and kind of like ruining the fish simulation. And they asked me what I thought about that, and I honestly, and I'm curious what you guys think, but I said, you know what? I think that's actually okay. Like, I think that's a good thing. Like the fact that
Absolutely.
they're talking about it, showing it to each other. And, because of that, people are like, I'm not going to click on that simulated fish. I said, that's great because they're also going to be sharing real fish too, hopefully, in the same thing
Absolutely.
and talking about it. And so that's one of the things I've been suggesting to people is if it makes you feel funny, if it makes you feel off or you're suspicious, is to show it to somebody, show it around and get a second set of eyes because that can combat the targeting. It can combat the emotional triggers and the sense of urgency and things. And something that will work on you will probably not work on your neighbor or your colleague, who maybe is in a slightly different position too. So, yeah, what
That's
do
a
you guys
really
think about
interesting,
that?
that's a really interesting observation. I've actually bumped into that multiple times where it's usually around a specific discrete scheduling feature of when a scenario, simulation scenarios, I was like, well, people will be able to show this to each other and it will lower our click rate, for people that we might have caught. And I'm like, you're seeing in action the kind of culture that you want to build. That's the exact behavior. I mean, you're looking at proof. If you're worried about that, that your program is going in the right direction. So take that lowered click rate for the win, even if it's 4 sets of eyes that got that reported. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, we are at time. So I will we'll make this recording available to everyone, and you can also get in touch with me, and I can forward questions to the Cofense team if you guys want to continue that conversation. And we'll also post about this on LinkedIn too. So join us on the conversation there. And thank you guys for coming and for presenting. This has been really helpful and really great to continue the conversation, from our Convene series. So thank you all so much, and I really appreciate your time and everyone for joining us. And thanks for all the comments, some familiar names in the chat there, and it's always great to see everyone. So enjoy the rest of your day today, and we will see you guys at the next event, hopefully in March, and the next online one next month. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Cliff. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.